Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Anchored Life podcast, where we share the stories of brave guests who have navigated life's toughest storms and learned how to thrive amidst hardship. I am your host, Belisha Tang. First, a quick and important note. This episode of The Well Anchored Life explores deeply personal and sometimes sensitive topics, specifically surrounding mental illness. We want to be explicitly clear that neither the host nor the guest are licensed medical professionals or therapists. We're simply sharing our lived experiences and insights from our own personal journeys. This conversation is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out immediately to a qualified professional. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you. All right, guys, this week I'm thrilled to have on the podcast Mary. Mary is an educator, instructional designer, and creative based in British Columbia. Her experiences with mental health have shaped her approach to work, learning, and creative expression, with an emphasis on self-compassion, community, and growth. Professionally, she works in digital learning and training. Creatively, she explores writing, visual art, and languages as ways of making meaning. Having lived abroad in Asia during university, Mary has a deep love of travel, linguistics, and cross-cultural experiences. She is passionate about thoughtful, honest conversations around identity and mental health, and is also interested in improving systemic issues, including mental health supports and the justice system. Everybody, please welcome Mary to the podcast. Hi, Mary. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today. So Mary, I met you on Instagram. We connected,
Yes.
and I actually came across your profile because you were featured on this account called the International Bipolar Foundation, and they feature like individuals with bipolar disorder, and they do like this little carousel thing with their pictures and different quotes that they say about their diagnosis and their recovery journey. And I came across yours, and I was like, oh my God, this girl is so cool,
Thank
and
you.
I need to reach out to her. I don't know, something about your profile just spoke to me, like, because I follow this page, I think it's a nonprofit dedicated to offering community support and resources for individuals living with bipolar. And I see a lot of their features, but for some reason yours like stood out to me, and I was like, I gotta reach out to her. I think it's because, you are a very creative person.
Yeah,
You're like a multimedia creative, right? You do visual art, you do writing, you do a lot of things. And I think actually there is a link between creativity and bipolar disorder.
mhm.
Science actually has proven that. So we will talk about all of that, like your mental health journey and everything. But before we get there, I want to hear about yourself and just introduce yourself, like where were you born and raised, and what got you into this creative path?
For sure. I was born and raised in Westminster, British Columbia. Mostly lived there my whole life, taught abroad in South Korea and China during university, but primarily based in North America. Um, and I've just always been a creative kid. I think it started from I was an only child, so you go to the park, you make friends, but there is a lot of like alone time as well. And in those moments, I would always escape to my imagination or be reading like fantasy books or fairy tale books or science fiction or watching media that was similar. Like I grew up watching The Twilight Zone and all sorts of sci-fi and surreal content, and I used to see it as an escape, but now I also just see it as a means of like expressing myself in like a metaphorical way.
Absolutely. Yeah, very cool, very cool. You mentioned you taught abroad, so you teach languages.
Yes,
Very cool.
English and French. I taught
Mm,
English in China for 9 months and South Korea for 1 year as co-op terms when I
wow.
was in school.
That's amazing. Yeah, very cool. So you are very, very creative, and I want to talk about now your mental health journey. So bipolar disorder is your diagnosis, and it is my diagnosis as well. So talk to me about like when you were diagnosed and what that was like upon receiving that diagnosis.
Yeah, it was only a few years ago. Um, it felt out of the blue at the time, but you look back retrospectively a bit later once things have settled, and it does give a lot of explanation for why certain things were happening in your life a certain way, why you were responding a certain way. But before I got to that point, I did think like my life was over.
Mm,
You know, did have like quite a stigma about the condition myself
yeah.
beforehand because I didn't know about it. You just see how it's depicted
Yes.
in films, you read the DSM-5 and
Yeah.
it just can be very scary and
Mm-hmm.
that's how I felt. So initially it was a lot of fear, but
Yeah.
it's come also to a lot of just, acceptance. It's a part of who I am and I try not to see it as a deficit. I try to see it as just like a differentiation from what is, typical.
I love that reframing. I went through a very similar journey of feeling a lot of shame about it.
Yeah.
The stigma from the external world and the way bipolar characters are depicted, like we
Yeah.
are, like violent, or I hate this
Hmm.
word crazy, right? This is I hate this word. But yeah, we are depicted as chaotic and, you know, in media. And I think not everyone is like that, though. Not everyone, if
Yeah.
you're managing it right, you are just like the next person.
Yeah.
But I also understand like that fear and uncertainty of like, what is my life going to look like now that I have this diagnosis and nothing is going to be the same ever again. That's what I thought,
Mm.
you know? And so talk to me about like that whole journey of learning how to manage it. And it's only been a few years, so that's actually not that long ago that you were diagnosed, but it seems like you're doing
Yeah.
really well now. So how did you heal?
I think a big part of healing was, utilizing the resources that were available to me. So, I was once diagnosed, I was provided with a psychiatrist and a case manager and a therapist. And it was hard at first, when times are low. Sometimes you flake on meetings and then you kind of, don't keep up with it. So it was a lot of learning to be, consistent, have that discipline, knowing that this isn't just something that I have to do, it's something that I should do and it's just going to improve my life.
Yeah.
And then additionally, just finding the right, medication,
Mm,
sticking to it, being consistent with it. Um, and yeah, it's a lot of self-discovery, figuring things out, a lot of, stumbling along the way.
hmm.
But yeah, just that. And then also just reaching out to, close friends and family, my support system.
Yeah.
And some people were, very accepting and understanding. And then some people just hear the diagnosis and all of a sudden you're a different person and they don't see you the same way. So,
And one of the hardest things I think about carrying this bipolar diagnosis is, stigma is like, I heard it defined by a therapist that I interviewed for this podcast, and she said stigma is when we're afraid of things we cannot see or understand, right?
yes.
So bipolar is a mental health condition, mental illness. We can't see it. Like it's not like a
No,
physical sign in our body. It manifests as behaviors, right? But then behaviors are what the outward behaviors, because it's heavily influenced by the brain. And if our brain has a disorder and it's not working as it should, right, it's going to give rise to some like what people may think are crazy or erratic or off, something seems off about you. They cannot pinpoint it though, they don't know.
yeah,
So, and we are human nature, I guess we are afraid of what we don't know.
of
Um,
course.
so it's hard. I'm sorry you went through that where you told someone that you thought could be trusted, and then
Yeah,
suddenly they see you as a different person just because of the bipolar label, which is
yeah.
not you, right? You are not your
Mhm.
diagnosis. You are a person before the label, right?
Exactly.
So I've been through that too, and it's hard. How do you deal with that? Like when people leave because of bipolar?
I think at first it was really hard. I told myself, you need to shrink yourself, you need to be more palatable to people
Mhm.
because if you're not, like, no one's gonna stick around. And I came to realize, obviously you can't not manage it and be in a bad state and expect people to, always stick around when you're not putting in the effort. But if you're genuinely putting in the effort and putting in the work, I think the right people, they'll approach with maybe still caution, but they'll approach with care and trying to understand you. If they hear or see you acting, perhaps a bit hypomanic or manic, instead of, labeling you as some crazy person and wanting to
Mhm.
stay away, they approach again with care, with carefulness, and with trying to understand you. And yeah, a lot of close people in my life have been like that, and then some people have not, but I just see that as the universe, showing me who my people are. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of the journey in this life is finding those right people. And if anything, I also try to see it as kind of a way to filter people out. If someone is going to be that judgmental, and not try to be empathetic or think critically enough, then maybe, it's for the best anyways.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. It's like it's a filter, you know? It's like
Hmm.
if they pass the test, then you most likely want to keep them around. They at least it shows emotional intelligence,
Yes.
and if not intelligence, then emotional curiosity. Maybe they don't know about it, but they'll ask the right questions. They'll ask, "Hey, I don't know, but I want to know. I want to learn and see how I can best
Yes.
support you." Right? And if the people in your life, if you tell them and they're just like, no, 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 I don't want to deal with you anymore. This is too
Yeah,
much. Well, then they're not meant to be in your life. And you don't want
exactly.
to be surrounded by people like that anyway. And it still hurts though. It
Yeah, you
still
still feel
hurts.
that pang, that sense of rejection. And
Yeah.
a metaphor and image I like to bring up is, you kind of feel like that little kid in the playground again that like nobody wants to play with. You get kind of taken
Yeah.
back to that, pain, whatever that may be for you.
Definitely. And we don't like to feel rejection. Like human nature,
Oh.
we are social creatures. We want to feel accepted and we want to experience that sense of belonging, you
Hmm.
know? So I just think, and it doesn't even have to be bipolar, it could be any stigmatized condition,
Of
whether
course.
that's like mental illness or you have some kind of like, oh, I have, for example, I have HIV, it's
Hmm.
stigmatized,
It does.
it's treatable, but stigmatized still.
Yes.
And you may get people who don't want to be around that, and it's
Yeah.
not something that was your fault, right?
Hmm.
It's not our fault that we were born with bipolar, um, because it's genetic, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that because I always thought trying to understand like where did my bipolar come from?
Hmm.
Um, to my knowledge, I don't have a family history of mental illness, at least not in my immediate family, but I'm Chinese
Hmm.
American, so in Asian culture, mental health is not really talked about. It's very
No.
stigmatized.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, you lived in China, right? You taught in China.
Yeah.
Do you see that like in Asian
Oh
culture?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I saw this in China and in South Korea. I noticed they had a bit more support for it in South Korea, but in
Hmm.
China, I taught at a private school. Classes were very small. And in a couple of my classes, there was definitely a child. I don't want to diagnose anyone, but they definitely had some type of, learning disability, um, or some type of condition.
Hmm.
This one kid, he was so smart, so bright, but he was always doing odd stuff, like
Hmm.
spitting onto his chair and playing with it and like doing just
Mm.
strange things. And I would talk to the teachers. I'd be like, "Hey, like, is there a special, class? Like, we don't want to separate him from everybody, but maybe once a day, like, is there some type of, thing for him? Is there a resource for him?" And they said, "Oh, like, no, he's like, there's no need. Like, he's just a bit special, but like, there's nothing, wrong with him." And it's that
Mm.
idea that it's, their emphasis is that it's something that's wrong, it's something that's shameful, it's embarrassing.
Right.
In the culture, it's a lot about saving face and having that image. And it is, unfortunately a big shame to the family still if
Yeah.
someone has some type of abnormality such as that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was kind of hard to see. And yeah, it just made me also just grateful for the fact that in Canada, it's very different. There's a lot of
Hmm.
resources for it. There's a lot of, even special TAs who are specifically trained to deal with that
Yeah.
effectively. Because
Good.
yeah, just pushing them in with everybody else and treating them exactly the same and expecting it to work, like that's not gonna,
No.
positive.
Right. Yeah, that's not gonna work because I feel like in our society, like it's not built for neurodivergence per se. There's more talk about it, open
Yeah,
conversation, but how are we even addressing it, right? What kind of necessary
yeah,
accommodations are we making to individuals with mental health conditions? Like, what are we doing on our end to best support them? And so going back to my original question about like the root cause of bipolar, I think it's a mixture of things, which is like genetics, you need the genetic predisposition
yes.
in the beginning.
Hmm.
But even if you have the genetic predisposition, it may not even express ever. But
Hmm.
some things in the
Hmm.
environment can trigger it to express. So for me, it was trauma in my upbringing. As a competitive gymnast in this sport, it was very traumatic for me. So I have a hypothesis that that's what led to my bipolar to trigger to turn on, and then this is what's
Hmm.
happening now. So, what would you say, if you could speak to it, is like, what do you think is the root cause of your bipolar?
Similarly to yourself, I definitely think it is trauma. Other than genetics, definitely trauma is what I think brought it up. And not only trauma, but I was ill-equipped to deal with it. I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. I was doing unhealthy things to try to cope, to try to escape, to try to stop feeling it. And then, if you run away from yourself for so long, it's only going to catch up to you. And I think that's what happened eventually. Because I always had a feeling that, something was different about myself, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. That trauma element, it's many people have like I scour Facebook bipolar
yeah,
groups and everyone's like what's the cause of bipolar? Trauma, trauma, trauma. I
yeah,
talked to a guy in the mental health field. He's like it's complex PTSD. It's like a
yeah,
culmination of like repeated traumatic events over a long period of time that is a very big predictor of bipolar disorder. And it
yes.
sucks, because like as children, we did not like ask for trauma or abusive
No.
upbringings. So how do you navigate that now, like looking back on your journey, and if you could talk to your younger self, like what would you say to her?
Oh man, what would I say to my younger self? I thought of this quite a bit,
Hmm.
actually. Um, I would probably just, say kind words to her. I don't want to be too specific because I think I might get a bit
Yeah,
emotional
no
about it.
worries. Yeah.
But I would tell her like you're enough, like you are like a good child, you're a good person.
Hmm.
Um, like it's not that something's wrong with you, you're just different. Like I would tell her that, she's beautiful, she's enough, and that everything will be okay. Because I think I had this fear that this like deep-seated fear for a very long time that like something terrible was like impending and like going to happen to me.
Hmm.
That was a big fear that I had growing up, and it likely was because of, traumatic experiences and things that have been said and done to me and things I've said and done as well. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I would just try to be kind to her because I think when I was young, I was so mean to
Hmm.
myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would just try to like nurture that part of myself, say kind words, affirmations, let them know that everything is going to turn out okay.
Yes. I love that. Mary, thank you for your being so vulnerable about that and beautifully said. I think I would say something very similar to my younger self as well.
Hmm.
That it's gonna be hard. You were not promised an easy life, okay?
Yeah,
But you will heal from this.
yeah,
And you'll be so strong and
yeah,
so wise and so brave. It'll force you to tap into an inner strength that you would not have
yeah,
had to otherwise.
exactly.
Right? And let's talk about silver linings of bipolar. I know earlier we were
Yeah.
talking about the link between creativity and bipolar, right? What's your thoughts on that? Like, what exactly is the mechanism that is like this link?
I'm I think it definitely has to do with like the first of all, like just the brain neural chemistry, right? Bipolar brains tend to be quite, sensitive from what I can understand. We have, excessive, serotonin, dopamine, and that's why at times, we can feel that sense of euphoria, that sense of creativity. All the ideas are just flowing to us.
Yeah.
So I think certain symptoms or components of the condition, they just tend to be elements, I think, that just jive well with creativity. I've always had very, strong visuals, very like vivid dreams. Um, yeah, I just always had a very vivid imagination, and I feel like part of that does have to do with, how my brain is, differentiated from someone who may be not neurodivergent. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. You mentioned like the euphoria, the increased creativity. Those are categorized as symptoms of hypomania or mania, which is like the high phase of bipolar.
yeah,
But sometimes I'm just like, what if I'm just naturally like this? Like why do we have to
yeah,
pathologize my good feelings? And yeah, if they're like a little bit too high and to the point where it's like okay, in conjunction with more clusters of the symptoms, like I don't have to sleep, I'm
mm,
impulsive, I'm doing erratic things that can be
mhm,
self-destructive. Like that's the negative side.
yeah,
And I'm not trying to romanticize bipolar because it's dangerous to
no,
romanticize it for sure, because it can be
yeah,
so destructive. But there are silver linings to it. And
yeah,
I had a therapist once tell me, okay, I don't know why he said this. I don't know. I don't think it was the right thing for a therapist to say, but he was like, how cool is it to have bipolar? Like, it is one of the most, like, it's one of those mental
ugh,
illnesses that, like, you have a gift. I mean, I don't know why you put it in that way. It's like, no, it's not
yeah,
cool. It's horrible sometimes, and like most of the time when it's,
yeah,
especially in the early phases when it's so hard. But how can I deny that when I am a little bit elevated, I have so much energy,
yeah,
life is optimistic. That's my
yeah,
perception. I feel like I can do anything. I feel like sky's the limit. I feel
yeah,
very confident and I can just write like a poem in 5 minutes. I'm like, how did I do
yeah,
that? I don't know how I did that.
exactly.
What are your thoughts on like what have you experienced something similar when you're in these states?
Definitely. In states of, I don't know if it's hard because you were talking about the pathology part of it, right? It's
Mhm.
like, was I hypomanic or like was I just having like a good day
Yeah.
on like a regular day? Um, Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, like have you ever had these feelings of increased creativity and euphoria when you were in a high state?
Definitely. I've noticed like there's times when, like you said, I'll get a poem out, 5 minutes, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I'll write like thousands of words in one sitting and it
Yeah,
feels effortless. It feels like it's just flowing, it's just coming.
I know.
Or I'll start getting ideas for projects.
Yep.
I'll note them down, jot them down.
Yep.
And I look back later to make sure, okay, is this actually a good idea? Or am I
Yeah.
just. And honestly, a good 60-70% of the time, it's actually a good idea. And it is
Yeah.
something that I end up like working on. And then some things are great ideas, but you just can only manage so many projects at
Oh my
once.
God. I know. I know.
But I think another, to look at the silver lining and the creativity when you're in that state, I have been able, to complete and work on everything. Your attention can be a bit split because you'll work on
Hmm.
one thing and then you get, interested or enticed by something else and you move on to it. But
Yes.
I've come to do a method of, work on this for a bit, work on this, and just keep it in the rotation. And
Okay.
if it takes years, it takes a few years. I think any art or any, written piece that has true value, it can stand the test of time. And if it takes you a couple more years to write it, like that's okay. And if it takes too long and it's not relevant when you do it, was it really, that great in the first place? So,
Yeah. Wow, that's really true. I like your method of like is I have so many ideas. I even have to keep like this Google Doc called Idea
mhm.
Dump, and I jot down all my ideas, and most of them are just not, I mean, they're good but not really realistic. And you
Yeah,
certainly can't do all of it all at once, even though you want
no,
to. I feel like bipolar, one of the symptoms is like the expansiveness of thought. You're like,
yeah,
you can't just do one thing and like specialize deep dive into one thing. You gotta
yeah,
like do a million things. And we're
yeah,
so creative too. And we're
yeah,
never short of ideas. But I think for me personally, my challenge is the
mhm,
follow through. And it's not because I don't have a good
yeah,
work ethic, it's because I get distracted because I have
yeah.
too many ideas. I can't focus. So your method is like you rotate through projects. You're working on multiple things at the same time, right? And you just
Yes,
chunk it like, okay, I'm gonna do this
yes,
now and then this now.
exactly.
It's a good method.
Yeah, and I keep like a little bit of a priority list. Usually it's kind of
Mm.
just in my head, or I just write a note on my phone.
Hmm.
I'll be like, okay, these are the three projects I'm gonna prioritize right now. Whenever I have time to be creative, I'll work on this for however long, an hour or two. And then next time I have time, okay, time to work on the next thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you and I were talking about writing. Let's talk about writing. So, I love writing. It saved me in my darkest hours, in college
Hmm.
when I was first diagnosed, didn't know what was going on, actively denying it. But I felt like I was also losing my mind. So writing was that kind
Mm.
of lifeline that kept me somewhat sane. And it was really about drawing continuity between like my past self, pre-bipolar, and
Yeah,
my current diagnosis self. It's like, am I still the same person? Writing and
exactly.
analyzing and self-reflecting was that way for me to draw that continuity that was really important for me in the early phases, especially. So, how does writing heal you? I mean, do you find it healing?
I do. I find it incredibly healing. It was probably one of my first hobbies or passions as a young child. I was always, writing little short stories, writing little poems, making little books and everything. And then as I got older, I saw it as a means of expressing, myself, my story. At first, if you look at my art Instagram, the Mary Cherry things, if you go to the very bottom and you start reading the poems, you can see the poems at the very beginning. It's all very cryptic.
Mm.
Like I used that English minor. I was like using so many words and all these complicated metaphors
Mm.
because I was afraid of people reading it and understanding it and thinking they would
Mm.
judge me. So I just made it like really, really cryptic.
Hmm.
Um, and kind of dense to read.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, I realized, I want people to get, the message more. You need to make things a bit more direct. And that doesn't mean dumbing things down. That just means, meeting people like where they're actually at and not
Hmm.
using all these, words that do have meaning, but that can kind of cloud the actual message that you're
Yeah.
trying to convey.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Um, yeah, wow. I need to read some of those poems. I think for me, when I write poetry, I am more direct. Um, Maybe just because I don't have the cryptic vocabulary, like it's so all this esoteric vocabulary. It's like, okay, I only have X number of vocab words to draw from. So,
Mhm.
but it's not about how much vocabulary you have, it's how you put it together, right?
Exactly.
It's like you think like, oh, a better word is just more complicated word or
Mhm.
like something that no one understands that makes it a better word. That's not
But
true.
it's
I don't think
no.
that's true. Um, yeah, no, writing is very cathartic for sure.
Yes.
I see poetry in particular as like a direct line to the soul. It's like when
Yeah.
you feel such strong emotions that you have no other choice but to let it out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to consume you. And then
Exactly.
turn it into art because normal
Yeah.
words don't do it justice, you know?
No.
And
And
then,
oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
Hmm.
and then for me with prose, especially,
Hmm.
like I'll write like something, traumatic or po negative or positive will happen. And like I'll write a story kind of based on it. Like I'll
Mm,
use, caricatures, like not actual people, but they can represent different people that I've met. The events will represent different feelings or experiences that I've had, but it's all very like metaphorical. It's usually, I tend to prefer writing, fiction, fantasy,
mm,
sci-fi, or even, I forget what magical realism. So like you're in the
mm.
real world, the setting is normal, but like strange things start happening.
Wow.
So transposing those experiences into these metaphorical stories is another, I think, very incredibly healing component for me,
Wow.
especially with my Purgatory Prophecies project that I'm working on as well.
Tell me about that one.
So it was originally meant to be just one book, but somebody brought it up to me. It could be better to make it into three smaller books.
Mm,
So it's three parts. Each part has seven either poems or short stories, and each volume has a title. So the first volume is called Pre-Psychosis.
mhm,
And those seven first, short stories, poems, there's also my illustrations in there as well. They kind of go over kind of what I was experiencing in my childhood, things that I was going through, especially as like a preteen and whatnot, and how I feel like that kind of set up the stage for me to eventually, unfortunately go into psychosis. So pre-psychosis,
mhm,
and then psychosis is the middle volume that kind of has stories and poems that reflect circumstances and situations where I was either in a manic or hypomanic state or just in distress. And then the third volume is called Post Psychosis and Recovery. So, talking about experiences in my adult life that have led to me being able to, recover, to be stable, and just, to be well grounded. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So, what's this book called again? Purgatory
Purgatory Prophecies.
Prophecies.
Yes.
Wow.
So the idea of that is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term purgatory. It is like a term from
Hmm.
Catholicism,
Hmm. Yeah, it's
but
like I mean, my understanding is like it's the underworld, right? It's like hell. Is it like,
no,
oh no.
actually.
Oh, okay.
So there's heaven, there's hell, and
Hmm.
then in the middle is purgatory. So
Mm.
let's say you're a person who you're going to make it to heaven one day, but you've done quite a few sinful things that need to be reconciled. You will spend some time in purgatory to purge yourself, to cleanse yourself, and then you can move on to heaven.
Mm.
And the metaphor of the book is that it's this idea of we have all these traumas, we have all these experiences that we've had, and until we deal with them, we will be stuck in a type of purgatory. We'll continuously, um, cause the same problems or run into the same problems or have the same issues if we do not confront what is, the root cause of that.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Wow. You just gave me an idea for like my memoir that I'm writing about bipolar disorder. So my
Mm.
style is less about fantasy. I think I am so impressed that of people who can create worlds in their heads, like
Yeah.
create characters from nothing, just
Yeah.
it takes so much creativity for that. For me, I write what I know. So I know
Yeah.
myself. So, and I'm writing a memoir, and I similarly kind of split it into three parts. It's like part one is like my childhood upbringing, and then part two is like the diagnosis and my tumultuous college years where I was actively symptomatic but not managing it. And then part
Mm-hmm.
three is like recovery, and I think I called it like landing, like I'm landing, finally
Oh,
I'm
okay.
landing. And yeah, so when you were talking about the outline of your book, I was like,
That's so
that's
cool. It's like it's very similar in terms of
yeah.
the structure of it, right?
Right. And it just speaks to this, like we all go through kind of universal phases in our recovery, right? Everyone's recovery journey looks different and it may take
Yeah.
different, like a duration of time. Some people recover sooner, some people recover like it takes longer for them to come full circle in their healing. But I think it's like, okay, initial is the diagnosis. You may have been
Yeah.
having symptoms before the diagnosis, and then you get diagnosed and it's like, whew. And then, but then it's like, maybe there's relief, like, okay, that explains what's happening. But then
Yeah.
there's also, oh my God, I am bipolar, like they think
Yeah.
their life is over, it's a
Yeah.
death sentence,
That's what it feels like. Yeah.
sort of feels like, and then there's the acceptance, radical acceptance, right? You got to
Mhm.
accept it at some point. You can't just deny it and run away from it because like you said earlier, it'll catch up to you and then always.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of learning the coping skills, figuring out the
Yes.
medication, the therapy. So let's talk about that now. So, what are your coping skills for managing bipolar disorder?
Yeah, so, it's a multitude of things. I think it always has to be like a multi-pronged approach. It has to be
Hmm.
holistic.
Hmm.
But I think the basis I notice, like when I'm really, really struggling and I'm having a hard time doing anything else, daily exercise
Hmm.
has really like changed my life. I found what works for me, and that's like kind of hit and like
Hmm.
weightlifting a little bit.
Yeah.
And I used to meditate, but I found it really hard to do, and it's a great skill to have, but it wasn't really working for me long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah.
Yeah, but exercise I found it's kind of similar. You're just counting for me, I'm counting reps, I'm counting how many sets, I'm just focusing on my breath.
Yes.
And, I do a lot of compound movements. So that's a lot of, connecting with your body and being just focused and in the moment and not thinking about anything else other than your form, the reps, your breathing.
Yes.
So that has helped tremendously. And then other than that, creative outlets, like we were talking about writing, my magazine mosaics. Sometimes I sketch. I'll do short form videos on a myriad of topics, whether it be, self-care or bipolar or art. And then taking, practices from therapy, different, breathing exercises, different grounding exercises, whether that be, coming up with five things you can smell, four things you can see, whatever that may be.
Hmm.
So those different techniques, those grounding techniques have helped a lot. And there's things that you can do even if you're in a public place to, self-soothe. I looked into those methods as well, whether that be, having something to fidget with, or whether that be, doing some light. I saw a therapist talk about this that you can do a light if you're sitting at a table, maybe do a light tapping on your knee. It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be a huge movement, no one has to notice it. Just so many methods to self-soothe. And then writing, of course, as an anchor. When it's really rough, I do write nonfiction. It'll be
Hmm.
journaling.
Hmm.
And then, as I'm able to, get out of that fight or flight mode, that'll evolve into poetry and short stories and art pieces. And I guess the final thing is just also something I found really difficult, and that's setting boundaries. I
Mm,
think that's a
yeah.
huge part of self-care and recovery because who you interact with, who you're kind of, exchanging. I call it like energies with. Like if you're around someone long enough and close enough, you get something. You kind of get some vibe off of them. They get a vibe off of you. And if you're constantly, around people who you can't trust, people who shouldn't be around you,
Hmm.
it's going to, take away from a lot of the positive self-care and anchoring exercises that you
Yeah.
do. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Super important boundary setting and being very selective with who you bring into your life. Um, you mentioned a quote about the garden. Can you repeat that quote? I love it.
yeah, of course. The quote is, my life is a garden and not everybody deserves a key to the gate. When I first came up with that quote, I thought it maybe part of me was like, oh, does that sound like I'm a snob? Does it sound like I'm being standoffish? Like you don't deserve to get into my gate? But I came to realize like that's just healthy boundaries and being an adult. And that's not saying that they don't deserve to be let into anyone's gate. It's just not here, not mine. So,
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. I read a lot of books on like there's one book called like what was it called? Mimesis or something like mimetic, like mimic, right? So it's like
mhm.
we this concept of like you pick up on the energies and mannerisms
Yeah.
and quirks and behaviors of the people closest to you. So
Yes.
and Warren Buffett said like you're the average of the five people closest to you, right? So
Yes.
we whether we know it or not,
Hmm.
subconsciously or consciously, like we are picking up on other people's energy. So all the more
Yeah.
reason to be very selective with who you let into your life. Not everyone
Yeah.
deserves a key to the gate, as you
Yeah.
said so beautifully. And what are your kind of criteria for like deciding who gets a key?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I'm still working on the answer
Hmm.
for. But at this point, I think what I look for is, I mean, there's things I've looked for before, but they still stand true. I look for how they treat someone who they can gain nothing from. So how do they treat wait staff? How do they treat someone who may be, less popular or less established or whatever?
Hmm.
I look at that, but I'm also looking a lot into, how emotionally intelligent are they? Are they able to empathize with people? Are they able to critically think? Or are they being petty? Are they being judgmental? Are they being, like a mean girl or, like a bully?
Yeah.
I really try now to look into that kind of EQ, that empathy. And then finally, I used to be like, oh, whatever. Like, if my friend isn't very smart, like, it's not a big deal. And it's not about just IQ. It's like, does this person have the critical thinking skills to be able to understand, to be able to empathize, to be able to, be there for you when things are difficult and convoluted and hard to understand? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I hate, elitism and being a snob, but I've come to
No,
realize like there's a certain caliber, there's a standard that has to be met. Otherwise, it could be very detrimental and at the worst harmful. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Bipolar and people, sorry, individuals living with bipolar disorder tend to be sensitive, It's like we're so
yeah,
sensitive to, I think that's one way to take out the pathology of it and just say,
yeah,
what is bipolar disorder? We are just very sensitive creatures
very
to
sensitive.
our environment and the people around us, and that's what makes us so human. And
Yeah.
that can even be a gift, that's why a
Yes.
lot of us are artists, the world is our playground. We're so
Yeah.
easily moved by things.
Yes.
And that's beautiful, but at the same time, you have to also have like this screen, this filter. You can't let
Yes.
everyone in, right?
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, personally, like today, for example, I was going through some friendship drama.
oh no.
Oh my God, I get that not everyone's perfect. I do
Of
get that,
course.
and I don't expect perfection from anyone, but I think one thing I really think about is that I think because we both have a mood disorder that's been challenging and we've had to put in so much hard work to learn how to manage it,
Mm,
once we have learned how to manage it, we come out on top, like stronger, but
yeah.
also more empathetic, more emotionally
Yeah.
intelligent than maybe the average person who doesn't have it because we've had to learn the skills. It was like
Yeah.
non-negotiable for us. Otherwise
Totally.
we'd be really struggling if we didn't have these coping skills to lean on. Whereas some people I talk to who don't have bipolar, I'm just like, I'm like, I'm the bipolar one,
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
No,
thing.
I've had like, friend falling out and then people, I describe what happened, they hear their side of the story and they're like, are you sure you're the one that's bipolar? Like the way
Right?
they're acting is quite, troubling
Right.
compared. Yeah.
It's a very real thing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
again, not trying to be elitist or say like, oh, we're better than or whatever, but
No.
um yeah, because everyone has their own challenges. And one question that is popped up just now for you is what do you do in times of like where you're just so like dysregulated and um you're just like, oh, like this is so hard, because we talked a lot about the mania. Let's talk about the depression, right? Because there's two
Yeah.
poles to this illness. It's like cycling between highs and lows. So depre mania can feel good, but it can also feel
Yeah.
scary. It can feel you can
Oh
be
yeah.
very irritable. You can, it's not always a good thing, but
Paranoia.
paranoia, even psychosis, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So, and then the low is the depression. So how can you go from like highest of highs, like feeling on top of the world, euphoric, creative, like I'm gonna do all these million things, I'm so productive, I have so much energy, to like nothing. You're like, I have
Yeah.
nothing in me. Like that drop is so violent. Like, how do
Yeah.
you cope with that?
Initially, I coped with it with a lot of bed rotting initially. Like my body just kind of shut down. Like I was, struggling to, have a shower and even just like feed myself. And
Mhm.
like I was doing like all right. Like I didn't need to like go to the hospital or anything, but I just felt so just depleted. And once I got over, well, it's still tempting to bed rot sometimes, but I've started, I just start by meeting myself where I'm at. I'm like, hey, you just, had this elevated state for however long. You are in this mode now, the depressed area, and, acknowledging it, being like, hey, like, it's okay. I've, been through it before. I'm not going to stay this way for forever. Because sometimes one of the first times it can happen really intensely, you can think like, am I just stuck like this now?
Yeah.
And just making sure that, I do little things like make sure, even if I stay in bed for a couple hours, I make sure I get out of bed, wash my face, go for a walk. Even if I don't have, the energy to go to the gym or, to do anything big socially, maybe I can see one friend or even just call one friend. I think a lot of it is just giving yourself grace and then giving yourself I think it's important to write you there is safety plans for when you're manic or
Hmm.
hypomanic or manic rather. But I think there should also be like a safety plan or things to do if when you're in that depressed state. And I don't think that's talked about enough.
Right.
You should have, the people you reach out to during that time, what you should do, and have that set out so that when it does happen, you're able to execute. Because I don't
Execute.
think you're going to be able to figure that out like while you're in that
No.
state. So,
Right. Right. When the catastrophe strikes or a crisis strikes, like having a plan to fall back on is like, and practicing those skills when you're healthy too,
yes,
because that's what we fall back on when shit hits the fan, is like our habits, our
habits.
learned behaviors that are deeply ingrained. You cannot come up with a plan when you're depressed, okay? Because yeah, depression just saps out all your energy
Every
and everything. And then it's so hard, So it's a real thing, these highs and lows. And do you ever wonder, like, why me? Kind of like, why did this happen to me? Like, it's so painful.
I think I used to think of that a lot more.
Hmm.
Definitely, there were times when, life was, rock bottom, and I was thinking, why me? And I'm fairly, spiritual or religious, so I
Hmm.
think things like, like Jesus, like God, like why have you like forsaken me? Like why is this like my life? Like I know you wouldn't give me anything I couldn't handle, but like why? Why does it have to be me?
Hmm.
But eventually that evolved into me trying to think like, you know, not to get too religious, but my
Yeah.
idea is like God or the universe or whatever it is. These trials, these tribulations, these difficulties, I think it is part of your destiny, part of your journey to make you grow. And if anything, I'm trying to kind of, I guess, see the positives of it. Because if I didn't have the condition, I don't, who we'll never know, but I don't think I would be nearly as creative. I don't think I would be nearly as emotionally sensitive or attuned and empathetic.
Hmm.
And I don't think I would have gone through the difficulties or the trials and tribulations that I did, and I wouldn't have those, lessons. Ideally, you wouldn't have to go through all that to learn those lessons, but sometimes, you do. And if that's my fate, I'm happy to accept it. I watched a film and there was a quote, or someone got a tattoo and it said amor fati, and it means to be in love with
Love.
your fate. And I
Yeah.
actually ended up getting that tattoo to myself as well.
No way. I
And that
love
was
it.
part of that journey of being like, I love my fate, no matter what. it is
Yeah.
because it's my fate, it's my destiny. So,
Oh, absolutely. And I'm also very spiritual. I'm a yoga teacher, and it is a spiritual practice, or it can be at least. And
yeah,
things like surrender, surrender the outcome, trust the journey, trust the process,
yeah,
accept yourself wholeheartedly without judgment, embrace suffering, embrace it,
yeah.
as lessons, because we can all learn from our trials and tribulations, you know. What are some of the lessons you've learned through bipolar? I think you mentioned some things like empathy, emotional sensitivity. Like what other lessons have you learned from your journey?
Definitely, like the boundary setting,
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out, how to establish and maintain positive relationships. That's been something that's been difficult. I think for me, it's not that I didn't have any positive relationships, but being, a young child, undiagnosed, you, I noticed I had difficulty, maintaining, long term, especially like female friendships.
Mm,
I would, act in a certain way and then they wouldn't understand me and I wouldn't understand them. And I'd be quick to just kind of like cut people off and like not say anything about it.
yeah,
But as I got older, try to approach people, try to, compromise, understand, see, can they take accountability? Can I take accountability for how maybe I have hurt them? And can we move forward like that, um, together? So yeah, I guess it's taught me a lot about, you know, through this recovery phase, it's taught me, how to establish and maintain stable, healthy, platonic, even at times romantic, relationships. It's really taught me how to navigate that through my recovery. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. We have talked a lot about boundary setting and being selective about the people you let into your life. And I really am glad we're talking so much about it because it is super important. Like I had a friend who also had bipolar and he was successfully managing it and very wise guy. He told me this phrase that I live by this phrase, and he said, "You must ruthlessly prioritize your mental health, Felicia." Like ruthlessly.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yes, that's true. That is so true. Even if it means cutting out people. Um, and, and one thing you said about like, how do you cut off someone, without, because I'm also kind of like in the past, I just block. You hurt me, you're jeopardizing my mental health. I'm just gonna block you or
Wow. Yeah.
ghost you or just be, yeah, because I'm ruthless, right? I'm being ruthless. But is there kind of like a more tactful, diplomatic way to do that? I mean, yeah, it's hard. Human
I think,
relationships.
yeah, I think definitely what I try to do is like, I'll try to bring up like smaller things at first to see if they're even like open to that. And then some people aren't. But if I'm close enough with them, I will then take another attempt and be like, hey, I'll try to have a sit down, like, hey, this is not that it's an intervention, but it low key is like you're
Mm-hmm.
doing these things and it affects me in this way. And then I always say, like, hey, if there's anything that I'm doing, like this could also be a time to talk about this.
Yeah.
And yeah, some people are receptive and some people are not. And if they're not receptive after that, I'll usually write like a final message, kind of like closure, and
Yeah.
then I'll just send that. I usually don't like block right away unless it was like something really, really terrible that happened. But I usually just
Mm-hmm.
send that last message and then that's usually
That's it.
that. So yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Um, wow, we covered a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, actually, can
yeah,
I bring up something else that I've
please.
learned as well?
Yeah.
Through this experience, I have, experienced how the mental health system works, in Canada, a little bit about how it is in the States, but not nearly as much.
Hmm.
And it's also given me insight as well, into the justice and the legal system and
Mm.
how at times it can really unfavorably sometimes treat certain mental illness components. And then these people, get treated like they're criminals when they're really just having like an episode.
Right.
So,
Let's talk about that. Yeah, because you know, incarceration is definitely a thing, when you're manic and you're doing like things that can be dangerous to yourself and to other people, right?
mhm.
Because you're not in the right state of mind. You're completely like dysregulated. And you may
Yeah,
be experiencing a break from reality too with
yeah,
psychosis, and it manifests as these behaviors that can be seen as a threat to society.
yeah,
How can one like navigate that? Like, what is the protocol for that? Like if someone calls the police on you, how can the police gauge like, oh, she's in a manic episode, like, so therefore, like, do we know what is her medical history? Do we know anything? Or are we just gonna
yeah,
arrest her? You know?
exactly. I've seen it twofold. I've seen it in Canada where there are still instances where I think mental health professionals are not involved enough. And instead of de-escalating, things escalate and things get worse, actually.
Mm,
But I've also, seen and experienced where not only will an officer come, but a mental health professional will come as well,
mm,
especially if, if they got a call and they look into you and they say, oh, this person has a history of X, Y, and Z.
mm-hmm.
I think that's a big part of it, having someone there who can de-escalate, because sometimes I think if no one's there to de-escalate, the person can be in a worse off point than when they were before authorities arrived. So,
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, yeah, I can't say I know too much about the legal system in the States. I knock on wood, have never had experience with incarceration, although I do have a funny story about I don't know if I should tell it on this podcast, but I think it's funny. I was in college and I was pretty manic, and I was hanging out with my friends at night, and we were going to In and Out. And I was just behaving in a very outrageous, loud way. I was like running across the street. They were moving vehicles. I
yeah.
somehow didn't get hit by a car, and I was like
Oh, no.
laughing my head off. And then I was like, okay, there are two police officers outside In and Out for some reason. They were just standing there. And then I was like, can I come in? Because they were still open. It was late, but they were still
Mhm.
open. And they were like, no, you can't come in. And I was like, but you guys are still open. I literally see people there. And they were like, sorry, can't come in. And I was like, obviously, when I was manic, I didn't really give a shit. I was like, okay,
Of
whatever,
course.
but yeah, I think about that sometimes and I'm like, okay, clearly I was not in my right state of mind to have done that.
Yeah,
Um, but what else could the officer have done? Really, I mean, I
yeah,
could have been a disruption in there
yeah,
if I had gone in, and they were just doing their
yeah.
job, so I'm not like
No,
antagonizing them or resentful, but
yeah. I mean, they didn't use, it sounds like, they de-escalate. They're just like, no, you can't come in here. Sorry. It sounds like, they weren't, um, treating you in a way that was aggressive or that would
right, it
make you
wasn't
feel like your
aggressive.
safety was endangered. So it's
Yeah.
also in how they handled it because, there's amazing cops out there, but there's also, bad ones who
Mm-hmm.
just the power gets to their head and they treat people very, very inhumanely sometimes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So is there anything else you want to talk about your journey, about any advice you can give to our listeners who may be going through similar challenges and weathering these tumultuous storms, and how they can drop their anchor and stay grounded?
for sure, I want to talk a little bit about mental health systems first,
Yeah,
and then,
let's
yeah, I
do
would
that.
love to talk
Yeah.
about like lessons and anchoring and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. So mental health systems.
Yes, so I've, experienced the mental health system. I know other people who have as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can only speak to my experience in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
but let's say you have an episode and you get sent to a ward, whatever ward has a bed open, because of course, the beds are always full, especially in Canada with universal health care.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the luck of the draw. So maybe you get sent to a really nice facility that has high tech, you're being monitored very closely, they're constantly assessing you. Um, you're constantly, being looked over, supported. And then there's other instances where you get sent to a facility where they're severely, severely understaffed. There's not much supervision. The technology just isn't there. The bodies, the eyes just aren't there. And it can make a world of a difference from having a hospital stay that really kind of heals you and prepares you to get back out there versus a hospital stay that gets you just good enough so that you're, a human again. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're out the door and it's created a big issue of this revolving door. A lot of people are just in and out because I was lucky for myself, when came out of the hospital, I had a job waiting for me. I
Mm-hmm.
had, friends and family. I had routine. I had stability. I had a home to go to that was, my own. But some of these people, they don't really have much of a support system. They're still, addicted to substances. Their mental health is, so poor. They have no support system. They don't really work. So
Mm-hmm.
they get just well enough and then they get out into the world and they don't have, anything grounding, anything anchoring for them. And a lot of times they're just in and out. I've spoken to people who, they'll be like, this is my fourth time in here in the last 2 years. And some
Mm-hmm.
people are like, I'm basically in and out of here all the time. And it's just, yeah, it's really just disconcerting. It's unfortunate. And I just, really hope improvements can be made
Yeah.
because, especially, I noticed after COVID, just the amount of mental health issues has just gone through the roof, right? You
Yeah.
have people who were doing okay, but then COVID just pushed them over the edge. And I think it's only made things more difficult. Nurses are there's always understaffed. And things are just so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
The system is always full. It's always difficult to, find a bed. And because it's so full and they have such a wait list, they're just trying to get you out of there as soon as possible because
Mm.
that's the those are the the kind of the handcuffs, the chains that the funding, the system has, allotted to them.
Yeah. So that's so hard. That is so hard. The whole in and out of hospitals thing is a real phenomenon. And I'm so glad that you did have the support, upon coming out of the hospital, but not everyone does. And it's like
No.
it's just this repetitive cycle. It's like, okay, they get you just enough to get above water. And then they
Mm.
send you out back into the world and you have to like learn how to swim and you don't know how to swim
Yeah,
and then of course you're gonna get landed back into the hospital and it's like what kind of quality of life is that anyway to like
exactly.
be in and out of hospitals and they're not what are they even treating? What do they even treat in hospitals? I'm so curious. Like they get you out of acute crisis, right?
Yes.
And what does that look like? Is there a lot of group therapy? Is there like medication? Like
It depends on the facility. Some
mm-hmm.
facilities have, activities every single day. They have people coming in from Doctors of BC. They have volunteers coming in from all sorts of different organizations. Some of them have so many resources like that, and there'll always be a doctor visiting all the time, and they get to everyone in a timely manner. But then that's, contrasted with places where you're lucky if you see a doctor, there's a good chance maybe the doctor, couldn't find you for a couple minutes and then you don't see a doctor again until they're in. Maybe they're not in again for another couple of days.
Oh my God.
So I think they tend to really just treat, like you said, the acute crisis, the very visible, clear symptoms. And then once you're just good enough, there's someone else who needs the bed more than you. Please get out, right?
Wow.
So.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And I had to, at times advocate for myself because, they'd say, you seem very, stable. Like, I think you're like good to go. And I would say, truthfully, I know I seem stable. I feel more stable, but I was like, I'm not ready yet. And I was like, please, like, I just want to stay a bit longer because I don't want to leave here too early and then just end up coming back
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah. And I'm glad you advocated for yourself. That's very
yeah.
important, self-advocacy and like self-directed healing,
Yeah.
is like you're in control, even though it feels like when your mind betrays you, it feels like I have no control. But no, you are always in the driver's seat, I feel like,
Yeah.
with how you want to take your healing.
Yeah.
Bipolar is not a choice, okay? Like the symptoms that happen, despite your best efforts of managing, they may still arise and
Yeah.
you'll struggle and have episodes. But I truly believe that you have the power to say, okay, I will seek out help. That's
Yeah.
that's what it is like the decision to seek out help because that's a
Yeah.
choice, right? It was really good that you advocated for yourself there. And yeah, I mean, I was gonna say something about was it like self-advocacy and oh yeah. So when doctors and therapists see you and there's no like biomarker for bipolar or something physical they can measure like a blood test and all they have is to go off of your word, right? And like how
Hmm.
your demeanor or your energy or your tone of voice or like your
Yeah.
affect, these like very intangible things, like
Mhm.
it can be so subjective,
Yeah.
like what if you seem stable, but you're actually
Yeah.
not? What if you're like you are a very articulate person and you're clearly educated and everything, people they may have biases like, oh, she's well
Exactly.
spoken, she can
Hmm.
articulate words really well because she's a freaking writer, but they don't know
Yeah.
that, right? So then they just deem you as like, oh,
Yep.
you're one of the more normal ones, we can just let you go, right? Isn't that like a real
Yeah.
thing?
It really is. And not even just let you go, even before that, it's like you notice like the nurses won't check up on you nearly as much. And I get it, some
Mm.
people do need it more, but it does kind of feel like you're neglected a bit. They're like, oh, you're so normal. And you don't really get much care or help because other people need it more and they do. And it's a whole issue with just, people being, units being understaffed, people being burnt out. Um, but yeah, no, it's a real issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and one more thing about the psych ward is like, do they group people with all sorts of diagnoses, like not just bipolar, but like other things like schizophrenia or like depression, like really bad depression or something like that?
That's the thing. It's a hodgepodge of everybody. You have people who just have, acute anxieties and people who are primarily just depressed. You have people who have ADHD. You have people who have schizophrenia, bipolar, BPD. It's everyone is just there together. And yeah, it can be like quite a bit because you have some people, they're just having a rough few months. Maybe they're going through a divorce or they
Mm,
got unemployed and they're just, here for a bit. And there's some people where they are, so unwell and just have been through so much trauma and adversity that they, don't have, or they've been in just like this for so long. So you have people who are just lifelong struggling, and then people who are just going through something for a little bit and then they're going to be fine. So I never thought about that for some reason, but yeah, I mean, it would be great if they could not that they need to like categorize and separate people, but I do think some type of personalization or differentiation should be made because at times it can be more damaging for the patients if you're, around certain people who may be significantly more unwell than you
yeah,
are. And
yeah,
they're, just so either deluded or paranoid or whatever it is. And at times, the patients are literally kind of, traumatizing and bothering each other's recovery and
yeah.
wellness. So, yeah,
Totally. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're doing so much better and you've been through that experience and now you're here 3 years later and you are
yeah.
doing remarkably well for 3 years post-diagnosis. My
Thank you.
first 2 years, I was just in active denial. So
Mm,
my real recovery didn't even start till like year two. And
yeah.
then it took about maybe a few to 4 years just to really learn how to manage it. And now, finally, 7 years post-diagnosis, I'm like, you know, I call it I'm in remission. I'm
Yeah.
still managing it every single
Yeah.
day. But it's not showing up anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
almost, I've become so well managed I don't even think about it anymore. But of course, it's always going to be there. There's no cure,
Yeah.
you know. So, Mary, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is living with bipolar, who's struggling? What would you say to them?
I would say, we have said this previously, but I would say,
Hmm.
you are not your diagnosis. You are a
Hmm.
whole person who's lived a whole life, just outside of your diagnosis. Your life isn't over. If anything, with healing, with proper recovery, I think, now that you know what exactly is going on with you and, you can start looking into how to treat it, you can end up having, an even more beautiful life than you ever thought was possible. And if you want to, have a voice, be an advocate, it can also just give you a sense of purpose if that's something that, you're looking for, you're interested in. Because I believe a symptom of bipolar, if I'm correct, is like that feeling of kind of hopelessness, like worthlessness at times,
Hmm.
especially when you're in that, depressed state.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I would tell them recovery is possible. There's people who are incredibly successful. You just have to take the resources and the tools and figure out what works for you.
Yeah. Love that. Beautifully said. All great advice. And Mary, it was so great having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
This was brilliant. And so just one more thing. Where can we find you
Yeah.
on Instagram to see your art?
Yes. So my Instagram handle is Mary Contrary Things. And yeah, that's where I post all of my art. I also do commissions. People can DM me as well to, purchase any art pieces, all framed. I'm looking into doing, prints soon and have more writing projects coming up. So
Amazing.
yeah, if you want to look into surreal art that, you know, demonstrates, mental health journey, but also, I have pieces that are just about family or social commentary. So yeah,
Love it. Love it. I'm gonna check out some of your poetry, especially because I want to check out everything, but especially those poems that you mentioned. I'm gonna try to see if I can understand the meaning of those cryptic
yeah,
poems. Yeah, but you're so talented and you're doing amazing, Mary,
thank
and I'm
you.
so proud of you for healing and for coming on here and being brave enough to share your story because it takes tremendous bravery to be vulnerable. And I think this is how we destigmatize mental illness is to talk about it and to show that, you're an amazing person and you're bipolar or you have bipolar. I'm trying to move away from that.
Hmm.
People first language. You have bipolar, you are not bipolar, you have
Yeah,
bipolar, and you are an amazing person, and you are so talented, and you are so much more than your diagnosis. And this is the message I want to get out there. And
yeah.
thank you, Mary, for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this was lovely. I really appreciate the opportunity. So,
Absolutely. All right. I'll talk to you later.
okay, thank you. Bye
All right,
bye.
bye. As we wrap up today's journey, a massive thank you for spending this time with us on The Well Anchored Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps other people find the show. We have new episodes dropping every Tuesday, so follow us on Instagram to stay up to date with new episodes and behind the scenes content. We appreciate you being here. Talk to you guys next week.